Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, I would very much like to continue on with our journey, our discussions, our discoveries, and our explorations with respect to the recent releases made by the Criterion Collection during this year of 2022. And specifically, I'd like to focus on a film which can be found in this set, which was released by Criterion earlier this year. This set being Michael Haneke Trilogy. And this set is given spy number 1163. It has a number of films, one of which being a work which is from the year 1989. And please pardon me for my poor pronunciation of the German language. I hope you can forgive me. The name of the work is Der Siebente Kontinent, or as it's referred to in English, The Seventh Continent. Let me say that this is a 3-disc Blu-ray set, and each disc has its own film, a feature film. And so let me just show the close-up of the disc, the first disc of this Blu-ray set, which has the film, which is from 1989, and it is the subject of today's discussion. The first film in this wonderful set, Michael Haneke Trilogy. And this is a film which stars, among others, in its really brilliant and compelling cast, Birgit Dahl and Dieter Berner and Leni Tanzer and others. And once again, this is the work from 1989, which is The Seventh Continent. Of course, it is from the director, filmmaker Michael Haneke. And my goodness, what a very provocative and compelling work indeed. As we watch this film through its running time, and we go through the various mannerisms and, say, impulses and procedures and day-to-day living and seemingly innocent episodes of life, slices of life of this family, this Austrian family, we understand that we are watching the portrait of a seemingly well-to-do family, the husband and wife and their young daughter. And we see various aspects of their lives play out. The husband, father, the wife, mother, and their own respective, say, professions and lives that seem to be meeting to various degrees, or to certain extents anyway, that seem to be meeting a level of, say, financial and professional success, which is also affecting the overall lifestyle of the family. And this also includes, too, a portrait of the young girl, the daughter, and her school life, and her interactions with students and people in the school, and also how she interacts at home. Now, this is the setup, in a manner of speaking, or one can say this is the setup of this work, The Seventh Continent, because what we find over the course of this portrait, or this examination, or this engagement with this family, over the course of specified points in time, we realize, or we begin to realize, that maybe there is something else going on that is under the surface, or perhaps it's out in the open, only to be recognized somewhat later, or perhaps under certain conditions, under certain lighting, or under certain circumstances or situations where these things that might not necessarily have been visible become visible. Now, what do I mean by this? I'm trying to be as vague as possible here, because there are a number of surprises and a number of ways in which this film twists and turns throughout the course of this examination or portrait of the lives of this family. And in this way, Haneke and company seem to be suggesting, or seem to be posing questions, let me put it that way, seem to be posing questions about the nature of society, as, say, concentrated within this family life, and not just how the family, each of the members of the family, seem to be integrated into their own positions or levels or roles of society, in terms of the externalized aspects of that: school life, work life, and other, say, relationships beyond the close circle of the husband, wife, mother, father, and daughter unit. There are external aspects that are explored in terms of their societal lives or their societal relationships. But we see too how the family or the individuals within this family seem to be either going along with such societal expectations or societal norms on the one hand, and or the possibility that there might be some impulse or compulsion or perhaps desire or maybe even need or some kind of readiness or maybe even unwillingness, depending on how one interprets it, way against or resisting against what one might call the societal norms that are being presented in these various episodes or sub episodes or stories within stories or anecdotes that are part of the daily ritual or routine of all these bits of information that are being presented to us through the cinema of Haneke over the course of the presentation of the portrait of this family over, say, as I say, specified points in time. And so this presentation or this setup or this conceit or this collection of conceits provides with it a number of potentially difficult and challenging and maybe even harrowing situations or setups that yield or that result in questions whose answers, again, are not necessarily as easily accessible as one might prefer or one might want. And now that is one of the, I think, ways in which this film operates. The Seventh Continent operates in a way that shows us information and shows it to us in a very methodical and precise manner. And sometimes it goes towards a certain sense of societal expectation. Other times, this methodical, precise aspect of presentation might, in a way, go against what one might identify as a type of societal-based expectation. And indeed, when we think about expectations, when we watch a film like The Seventh Continent, I think this idea, too, of how we, the viewer, interact with this type of information, how we, the viewer, can see how this our reaction to this type of story as it's being presented, how that might thus reflect in our way or in our personal way, how we thus view our own place and our own positions in society, and perhaps whether we might be said to be somewhat complicit in the things that are being reacted against by certain persons or certain groups of people that we meet in, say, a film like The Seventh Continent or indeed other works by Haneke. Or perhaps we might say that there's something else going on here. Maybe there's something else where we can be said to be somewhat sympathetic to the characters that might be said to be undergoing a sense of, say, shift or change or sense of resistance or questioning, or perhaps non-questioning, as the case may be, their place in society or in the context of, say, the family unit or family living. And so this film, The Seventh Continent, in that way, I think, poses these sets of questions in an intimate fashion, again, in the context of the family unit and the family story, and indeed the many sub-stories that make up each of their roles: husband, wife, mother, father, daughter, parents, children, in a way that I think is very accessible. I mean, they talk about stories and they do routines and daily activities that I think are very accessible, very understandable, things that perhaps that can be said to be very universal in a manner of speaking. Sitting around the supper table, eating a meal, or talking about work, or writing a letter to a relative, talking about what's going on with someone's job or with something going on at school, maybe some difficulty or some kind of a situation or dust up is occurring at school, etc. Or maybe it's happening at work as well. Maybe there's a story about a promotion or the need to try to impress the boss in order to try to have the hope of getting some kind of promotion. If that's the case, what happens to the other work personnel around that promotion, or the effect of the promotion, et cetera, et cetera. So these, I think, are part of the daily routine or daily lives of these characters that we meet that I think can be said to be very accessible and very universal, unless our way in, or one of the ways in which we as viewers can go in and become part of the world. But at the same time, once we are in, or once we become engaged, we are confronted with a number of very complex questions and a number of seemingly disturbing outcomes and attributes that, again, maybe compel us or maybe invite us as viewers to try to seek answers to what is going on. And this is one of the great things about a work like The Seventh Continent, is that it allows us room for that interpretation. It doesn't give us answers directly. It doesn't say the cause of X is Y. It doesn't say the reason why this is occurring is because of this. It doesn't present it in that way, but instead it presents it in a way that can be said to be, on the one hand, a full, direct presentation of information, but on the other hand, it is done in a way that is very, I think, precise, very clinical, and also very cleanly, so as to then give us the opportunity to try to sift through this information and try somehow to derive our own answers from the set of questions that we feel are being posed. And indeed, in that interpretation of a work like The Seventh Continent, we may or may not be able to get those answers easily. And it's okay if we are not able to get those answers easily, because that's part of the point, one can say too, of a work like The Seventh Continent, is that sometimes when we're talking about events that we see in The Seventh Continent, or sometimes when we're talking about stories of a family that can be said to be taken to certain, say, dramatic extremes, or certain elements or areas of, say, a dramatic exposition that may or may not be inexplicable, or that may or may not be explicable, that might cause a sense of, say, maybe eagerness to want to try to find answers on our own, and we might be able to derive those answers, or the possibilities of those answers, from, say, the way in which the family seems to be integrated into society, or how the family members seem to be reacting to or reacting against aspects of, say, societal, of externally imposed societal norms, and how that may or may not lead to a sense of easiness or uneasiness, a sense of quiet satisfaction, or perhaps a sense of disquiet, unease. Whatever the case may be, there is a sense of reaction or cause and effect. Now, what those causes are and what those effects are, I think, are, on the one hand, they might seem clear, but that's one of the great strengths of a work like Seventh Continent from Haneke, is that it is not always what it meets the eye. There is always something else that seems to be going on, and we as viewers, I think, are left to question and wonder, and perhaps just interpret what the reasons are, if there are any. Now, this is, I think, in an indirect way too, talking about how we as members of society digest and consume information in terms of, say, media consumption, and how maybe direct and impactful events, say crime or violence to that extent, might be digested in that way. And that type of digestion, or that type of a digestion of seemingly external information, might have a distancing effect. And so what's so fascinating about a work like Haneke's The Seventh Continent, is that it seems to be, on the one hand, in a cinematic way, on purpose, trying to preserve a sense of the distancing effect of this externalization of mass media consumption on the one hand, but it's also recognizing that distance. And in the recognition of that distance, one can say that we seem to be getting a sense of intimacy. Now, that intimacy might not always yield direct answers to the questions that are being posed, but that recognition of the distance leading to a sense of intimacy is very important in terms of an engagement. Now, the reason why I mention this is because one can say, in the context of the story, The Seventh Continent, or how we as viewers engage with the characters that we meet in The Seventh Continent, one can say that in the course of their story, or the exposition of the story, while we can say a sense of the externalized distancing is being recognized. In that recognition, one can say that we can somehow or another still get a sense of these characters, and we as viewers might, it might be said, get a sense of some clue or some clues or some hints or some nuances of their inner workings, of their true feelings, whether that is directly exposed or directly expressed on film or not. Still, that recognition of a distance leading to a sense of getting to know the characters even more in that wonderfully cinematic, paradoxical way, I think is one of the great strengths of this work. And thus, it leads us to this paradoxical questioning of what is the root cause of certain, say, angst or dread or, say, acts that are manifesting themselves. Sometimes we see acts and actions that are carried out by characters in a work like The Seventh Continent that are so, in their own way, uh, they are inherently ones that make us want to ask questions. Why? Why is this happening? Why is this going on? Is it something of a societal reason? Is it a broad macro level type of class reason? Or is there a sense of financial distress or woe? Or is there some kind of psychological, inherently psychological reason in one of the characters that we are meeting? Or is there something else going on that might have a slight criminal element to it? Or maybe there's none of the above. Maybe there's no reason. Maybe there's something that is completely unexplainable that is going on. And perhaps if that's the case, then is the root cause really to do with these people individually and uniquely? Or is the root cause something broader and grander and perhaps much more on a systemic level, such as, say, the foundational aspects of the society, the modern day living that is a part of the complex environment that we see as we watch a film like The Seventh Continent. So these and other questions are, I think, on display with full force and a sense of directness that is very candid, that is very disturbing in a lot of places. This film does have some very challenging concepts at work that, again, whose answers are not readily accessible all the time, but that is the point. And the point is for us to then be confronted with this information, and as uneasy as it might make us feel in the context of this family story, The Seventh Continent, as uneasy as it might make us feel, still we are compelled to ask questions and to wonder. And thus, in that wondering, in that asking, perhaps a little bit or perhaps a lot of our own sensibilities become under the microscope, in a manner of speaking. And in that way, we are in for one heck of an engagement, a cinematic engagement indeed. That is the great strength of this and other works by Haneke. And indeed, it is the foundation for compelling cinematic viewing. This is the work, again, from 1989. What a brilliant work this is. This is the work which is The Seventh Continent. The Criterion Collection has released this film, The Seventh Continent, as part of this overall set, which is the Michael Haneke trilogy set. Again, this is the 3-disc Blu-ray set. Spine number 1163. The films themselves don't have individual spine numbers, but the set comprehensively does. But going to the set, it has 3 films, 3 discs, and 1 film per disc, the Blu-ray set. And so disc 1 has the film The Seventh Continent plus supplements. I should say, too, that it has a great booklet, and we'll talk about this robust staple booklet in a separate video, but it says about the masters: The Seventh Continent, Benny's video, and 71 fragments of A Chronology of Chance are presented in their original aspect ratio of 1.66 to 1, supervised by director Michael Haneke. These digital masters were created in high definition from the 35mm original camera negatives. And so this film, and the other films, in fact, have been released, I understand, on other physical media releases in the past prior to this Criterion release. And indeed, I have seen this film a number of times on other past, say, releases or other physical media formats, etc. So while I wouldn't say that this Criterion release, at least to my limited experienced eye, it doesn't seem to be any striking difference, say, in terms of look or sound with, say, other past releases that I've experienced. This is still a very, very good option for, especially for those who are seeking to explore the works of Haneke, wanting to start with the films in this so-called trilogy, but maybe have not yet purchased them or not yet had a chance to see them yet. I think, especially for those who are interested in the works of Haneke and have not yet seen this film, this is a great place to go in terms of this. So please keep that in mind. For those who already have the works of this trilogy, it may or may not be. And I mean, it may be something to consider, but maybe at the end of the day, you may or may not choose to get this Criterion release because, again, from my own perspective, other releases have been, I think, quite good or quite reliable in terms of quality. But that's not to say anything bad against this. This is also, I think, a very high quality, very reliable release in terms of look and sound of this work. So it's a very good option for those who are interested in terms of that. So, and now with that conversation, let us turn our attention to the supplements which can be found accompanying this disc number 1. So we have a number of supplements, and I think they can be said to be linked to, specifically linked to this work, The Seventh Continent. So what do we have accompanying the Blu-ray Disc 1 in terms of supplements? First up, we have a supplement which is from the year 2005, and this is a one-on-one conversation with Michael Haneke, Sergei Tobiana. This is approximately 16 minutes, and this is specifically about the Seventh Continent. And in fact, this is the first of many conversations that we will have with Michael Haneke in this format. And so this particular excerpt will be about the Seventh Continent. And on the other discs, we will have the same conversation or the same round of conversations, but on the separate films. And so here is that part of the conversation or that part of the discussion between Tobiana and Haneke, again, about the Seventh Continent. It's really great, really, really great, especially if you haven't seen it already, and if you're new to this work, The Seventh Continent, and new to the works of Haneke. This is a wonderful place to go. You get a sense of the manner and the way of speaking and the tone of Haneke as a person, as an artist. And when he speaks about this work, there is a real sense of directness and also an earnestness, which I really appreciate. It's always fascinating and wonderful to hear from Haneke directly. And so when we have the topic of the Seventh Continent here, he mentions, for example, about how this is a film that he designed or he focused on or he presented in a way, as he says, it's a story with no answers or without answers. And so there is a suggestion of maybe some kind of secret or some kind of burden or something that could be said to be part of the reasoning or the thinking process of the characters of this family that we are meeting, but it's not sure. We're not clear. It's not. The film doesn't make it wholly obvious, which I think is part of the point. And indeed, as we hear Haneke speak in this way, we understand that this is indeed part of the grand design of this film. The Seventh Continent. It is meant to be thought-provoking, but thought-provoking in a way that is at the same time not giving us direct answers, and that's the point. And that is really important to keep in mind. So, in that way, we can therefore recognize that there is a methodical, precise purpose behind the way in which information is presented in this film. There is a almost staccato, rhythmic way that we have sequential shots or repeated action shown again and again, and a type of focusing in on objects or a certain stillness of shots. But then there are ways in which this repetition then gives way to slight differences in detail, slight reactional changes, maybe even emotional expressions that might be different from round to round to round. And so this shows either a type of breakdown or type of resistance or type of reaction, or maybe it's just a revelation of something that was already inherently there to begin with. Who knows? Who knows? I mean, this is again part of the the sort of acclaim and the challenge of a work like this is what we as viewers are able to, say, interpret from these bits of information that are presented to us in this really compelling way. So to hear Haneke speak in this way about this work in this manner, I think gives further support to this sense of viewing or reading this film. So this is another way why this interview is really so informative, so brilliant the way it is. And so he does speak too about how he came about the story, about it was something that he read as a newspaper story, and the idea of showing information, but also not necessarily showing everything, or not necessarily showing all the reasonings. And this is also to how he reacted to reading the information or reading the newspaper story to begin with, because it was presented in a way, as he describes it, not necessarily giving the direct answers as to why the thing that was being reported on happened the way it happened. It just was reported on. It happened. And so he acknowledges how this was something that really maybe something that he questioned and something that he wanted to explore and dissect, but dissect in a way that was still preserving the sense of, I don't know if mystery is the right word, but preserving the sense of distance. And again, this idea of the preservation of distance, in a way, in this paradoxical way, leading to some kind of further insightful examination of why these things are happening the way they happened. So that type of recognition of the paradox of distance and intimacy, I think, is really important. And it shows through in his comments here in this great interview. And so here, again, it's mentioned to this idea of daily tasks, repetition, and the like. And so there's also the way in which the Haneke here links this idea of repetition and daily tasks and a type of liberation and non-liberation, so freedom. And so this idea of how the story could be said also to be a story about the discovery of freedom or liberation, or the exercise of freedom or liberation, or perhaps restraint vis-a-vis societal norms that are being broken through the acts or the processes that we see or witness to as we watch the film proceed from beginning, middle, and end. So, but that could be just part of the tale. That could be just one of many possible interpretations. Maybe the opposite is true. Maybe there is a way in which this breakdown, or this breakdown of certain societal norms, let's put it that way, could also be said to be its sense of restraint. And so maybe it's the antithesis of liberation that we were talking about here. And that could be one of the reasons why, or one of the interpretations that could be had in terms of why characters are seen doing and responding the way they're responding. So is it a story about liberation, or is it a story about anti-liberation? Who knows? Your guess is as good as mine. But the point is that those questions are indeed possible. And not only possible, but they thrive in this wonderful emotional and intellectual environment that is the seventh continent. So this is really quite brilliant. And indeed, I without going into too many details, because he does speak about specific details of the film, and so and certain maybe reactions that audiences may have had to specific shots, specific actions that were had, specific things that were maybe taken and altered or manipulated or destroyed, and how certain maybe responses to objects being affected versus, say, individuals being affected, how there's an interesting interplay in how audience members were reacting to one thing versus the other. And that also might lead to a sense of irony or purpose that I think goes hand in hand with the whole point of why Haneke was making this film to begin, or at least what he was suggesting might be one of the points. So this is really quite fascinating indeed. Also, there's too this idea of the way in which this film is an embodiment, or maybe a reflection of certain aspects of modern day living in Austria, or Europe writ large, or Austria specifically, and modern day living there in terms of class, social mobility, professional status, family life, societal norms, societal mores, etc., and how those, and certain taboos that are either spoken or unspoken, etc. And so this might be certain sense of, say, specific cultural and a national-based cultural aspects that are being reflected, or there could be universal aspects there as well. So, and that could be linked also to a sense of society-based culture and also history, both history and history that could be even very, very current or very modern, mid to late 20th century even, or even before. So there are certain implications that are inherent there as well that might be themselves very disturbing or very challenging or very confrontational, depending on one's viewpoint as a viewer. So for these and other reasons, this is a really great primer in terms of this film. It's also a great way a place to go in terms of getting to know Michael Haneke and his manner and his way of speaking. And there's a real earnestness and type of passion that one can feel when he's speaking about this film. It's really fascinating. So this is the 2005 discussion with Michael Haneke, again focusing specifically on the seventh continent. This is totaling 16 minutes. Continuing on with the supplements, we have next a one-on-one discussion with Alexander Horwath, and this is described as having been conducted by the Criterion Collection in 2018. This is approximately 27 minutes. I should point out that this appears actually to be maybe the same discussion session with Alexander Horwath that was used as the basis for a supplement for another Criterion release of another Haneke work, Funny Games. And so I think that the same session, I think it was, because the background is the same also, it says it was 2018. So my guess is that this same session was the opportunity for Criterion to also talk about films like The Seventh Continent. So it's great that we have this discussion here, 27 minutes of it, and so it's really wonderful. It's called Toward Haneke's Cinema, and so we have a discussion about how he saw the film for the first time at Cannes in 1989, and how he was really startled by the work, and how he was very, very engaged and so affected by the work, and how this was one of the ways in which he and Haneke became acquainted, and also he became very much affected by Haneke's work in a way that he wanted to write more about Haneke and focus on his filmography. And also, this is a brief discussion about Haneke's career, in terms of some of the noteworthy points of Haneke's career prior to 1989 and his TV work, and also his background. Horwath describes Haneke as not necessarily having a quote-unquote typical cinephile background per se, but rather Haneke's biography and background seem to be towards focusing on studies about literature and theater and music. And so he describes to Haneke's background or Horwath describes Haneke's background as being a bourgeois culture, focusing on theater, etc., and then how this essentially formed the basis of his work, Haneke's work, in the Austrian film industry and television film industry, and how this leads him to asking various questions too about history, Austrian history, and indeed European history writ large, through his work that is ever developing, ever challenging, leading up to 1989. And so he also talks too about some other filmmakers along the way, comparisons or contrasts perhaps with a filmmaker like Fassbinder, and how there is maybe a self description about maybe Fassbinder or maybe anti-Fassbinder and the like, and how Horwath actually posits that perhaps Haneke's work in certain aspects might be said to have close connections with the works of Fassbinder, more so than perhaps Haneke might be willing to admit himself, perhaps. And one way this conversation turns is the way in which Haneke views, say, the way in which female characters in Haneke's films are depicted and represented versus how, say, female characters in Fassbinder films are depicted or presented, but as a distinction. However, Horwath, I think, makes this point about, or posits how this might be a way in which there is more similarity in fact, between the two filmmakers than meets the eye. So it's a very interesting discussion indeed, and also, I think, a very lively debate and discussion going forward. And then leading to the development of what could have been, or what had been, according to Horath here, originally planned to be a TV film, but then ended up being a feature film that is now The Seventh Continent. And so this has a sense of, as he mentioned, this sort of the signature of an auteur filmmaker, and also the film has a real profound impact. And that profound impact does have echoes in the future works that we will see after The Seventh Continent, those being Benny's Video and 71 Fragments of a Chronology of Chance. And so we have some remarks about those other films to follow. There is a thematic core, thematic connectivity that can be said to be there. But at the same time, I do want to emphasize, and as does Horath here too, that there is also a distinct quality to each of the films. And so The Seventh Continent has its own distinct quality that I think he not only respects, but also celebrates and identifies with a great deal of passion and a great deal of respect, and also a great deal of admiration. So this is another great conversation with Alexander Horwath, and this is again from 2018, approximately 27 minutes. It's really great. Please check it out if you can. And then the Disc 1 supplements end with a trailer, the trailer for The Seventh Continent. It's a very fascinating, kind of tantalizing trailer, so it's well worth checking out if you can. There's another film we'll talk about later in this set where the trailer, I would think probably is not worth, it's probably not a good idea to check out because it actually gives a lot of information away. So we'll talk about that when we get to some of the other films in this. But this trailer for The Seventh Continent seems to me to be very tantalizing and very, very much not giving things away, while at the same time giving a sense of what the film is in that very mysterious way, which is, I think, the essence of a great trailer. So it's great to have this as part of the supplements package here for the first disc of this Michael Haneke trilogy, and that disc, of course, being for the film The Seventh Continent. Now, with the rest of the discussion of this, of course, we will talk later about this wonderful booklet. There is an essay on this, but it's a comprehensively written essay, and so it is talking about each of the films in this trilogy, one of which, of course, being The Seventh Continent, but then there are the others. So we'll talk about the essay when we have our wrap-up discussion at the end of this video discussion run. But for now, my dear friends, this has been a discussion, a brief discussion on this really compelling work, which is The Seventh Continent from 1989 from filmmaker Michael Haneke, which is part of this set, which is Michael Haneke trilogy. And so, my dear friends, this is, I think, a very compelling work, a very challenging work, a difficult work indeed, and certainly not for everyone. But if you are okay with this type of provocative work, that again is something where the answers to the questions might not necessarily be readily accessible, but on the contrary, might be things where we as viewers are invited to make interpretations based on all the information that we are presented with as we watch this film. If that is okay with you, then this is certainly a very profound and very memorable and quite a memorable place to go indeed. And it's also a great place to go in terms of a further discussion and discovery and exploration and journey into the works of Michael Haneke. It's part of this release, which is Michael Haneke trilogy, one of those films being this film, which is The Seventh Continent. All right, my dear friends, so that's it for now. Let us continue on with our discussions of this great set. Next up in this video series will be a discussion on the film Benny's Video. So until we see each other again, my dear friends, please be happy and healthy and well, and please keep on watching a lot of great movies. So until the next video, my dear friends, stay strong, stay safe, and cheers.